America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We always like having kids in the room to lead us through that. More natural.
Have a great day.
All right, can we get a motion to approve tonight's agenda, February 24th, 25?
Motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And can we get a motion to approve the minutes from the last time we met, which I guess was 2 weeks ago, the 10th, February 10th.
Motion to approve the minutes from 10th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Pretty upset. All right, school committee chairperson comments. Just welcome our administrators and teachers back. Hopefully everybody had a good break last week. It's all rested and ready to go for the next section. So next up, we got community comments. I don't see anybody in the room tonight that's looking to talk. Are you sure? You're the one and only. Sam, anybody online raising hands?
I see no hands raised.
All right. So I'd like to say that is our one and only time for community comments. Next up, we got student comments.
All right, so Nina unfortunately could not be here today, so he did send me a few things to bring up. So the jazz ensemble played at Norwood High School where they were listened and critiqued by judges, and they also were able to attend a clinic following their performance where they received insights on how to improve and better prepare for the NAJE festival. So the jazz ensemble will be competing in and hosting a jazz festival known as NAJE for the Central Mass District this coming Wednesday, the 26th. And so I only had one main thing to bring up. So this week, Mendon-Upton will be sending about 70 students to this year's state conference for DECA. So DECA is a business club where students can compete in year-long business projects or in a role-play style business scenario. And they'll all be vying for a spot at the International Career Development Conference in Orlando, Florida. So myself and senior Maggie Lewinsky, we serve on the state action team. So we'll be running this conference. So this actually will be leaving for Boston tomorrow, and we'll be helping run, prepare registration, and give speeches for that. And I'm also going to be running for re-election for the Massachusetts DECA State Action Team 67 to serve next year. So yeah.
Cool. Congrats. Great.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck.
What time do you have to leave tomorrow?
Tomorrow,
Following this meeting tonight.
I have to leave at like 10 tomorrow.
Okay,
Not
that's
too
not
bad.
so bad.
Not too
All
bad.
right.
You'll be able to make a couple classes in the morning.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, that's it for student comments. I think next up, we've got superintendent and administrative reports.
And we have an out-of-country field trip request. I moved it up to the front there, Megan. So if you want to come on up and fill us in. Right. Where should I sit? You can sit here or there, wherever you prefer. Okay, I can be able to see better.
I talked to Megan just for a minute, to say, hey, we've got a very similar or the same board that approved last time. So if you want to talk a little bit about the last trip, we'd love to hear how that went and what you did
Yeah,
different.
so, are you gonna pull up the slides or should we not? Either way. I was just gonna talk
Which
about,
slides do you want? Can you pull up the slides that are in there, the presentation?
I would just talk about, how it went last time and then how I plan to roll it out this year. And, I don't have to go through the whole itinerary or anything, but I just wanted to make sure that we were on board with my plans for how to roll it out this year as well. But similar to last year, I made it first available to Spanish immersion students because I think it's really important for those Spanish immersion kids to have as many authentic language experiences as they can. But then, so I'm planning to promote it with the Spanish immersion group first, and then give them a chance to sign up. And then a week later, open it up to everybody else. I don't think that there is a cap to how many. They said I could have as many people as I want, but I also want it to be a manageable size. So once I see how many Spanish immersion travelers there will be, then we'll open it up to the rest of the current 6th and 7th graders. And then we'll see how many sign up for that as well. So I'll be doing 2, you can see there, I'll be doing 2. That's a promotional flyer that I'll be passing out to the Spanish immersion group. And then I have another one that's just a little bit different information for Zoom at the bottom that would go out to everybody else a week after the Zoom for the Spanish immersion group. So the Zoom for the Spanish immersion group will be on March 13th, and then a week later, on March 20th, I'd open it up to everybody else. So, but I'll just quickly go through, if you don't mind scrolling down to, okay, so I mentioned to Eric at the beginning of the meeting that last year I traveled with a small company. They were really great in a lot of ways, and the trip was a great success. There were some things about that company that were administratively challenging for me as the group organizer. And the Lori Holloway, Kate Reardon, and other people have also used Explorica and highly encouraged me to give them a chance. It's a big company. And so those administrative and organizational challenges wouldn't be an issue this year. So I figured, let's give this a try. And it's going to be a very similar trip. So that way I can, compare two very similar trips and then decide which company that would be better to move forward. Because I do hope to do this every 2 years. But again, we're going to have two different types of experiences. We'll have Spanish immersion focused activities and also some that will be English focused for those who are not Spanish speaking. You can just scroll to the itinerary. Just want to go over some of here. So I just want to highlight some of the cool things we're going to be doing on this trip. Another additional thing, we'll be adding in some time in Madrid, which we did not do on the last trip. Also, the last trip we stayed in one hotel. This one will be moving around. We'll be staying in 4 different places. So the kids will get to stay in 4 different cities. So we'll be doing 2 days in Madrid. We'll also be doing some museum visits that we didn't do last time. And one thing that will be super fun is this Mercado San Anton. It's going to be an interactive visit. The kids are going to have a scavenger hunt and have to go find different things at this Mercado. So there'll be an English version and a Spanish version of that for the 2 different language abilities. The next day we'll be going, this I'm super excited about. So we're going to be organizing a soccer match with kids from Spain. So kids are going to be able to play soccer with Spanish kids. So there'll be opportunity for they hire a referee and a guy to organize everybody. And I'm assuming they'll mix and match, Spanish kids and us on both teams. And those who don't play soccer can cheer everyone on and mingle on the sidelines. But that's one of the things I'm most looking forward to. So it's our version of an immersive experience. Last year we did a school visit. This one I think the kids will enjoy even more, even though they did enjoy the school visit. And also we're going to be going to the University of Salamanca, which is one of the oldest universities in Spain. And we'll be doing some language classes there on that day 3. And it's going to be different classes again for the different levels that we have. You can just scroll through. So I'll just highlight some of the things. We're going to the mosque again on day 4 in Cordoba. Do some sightseeing in Seville. This coincides again with the Feria de Abril, which is a super special week in Seville. So we'll be going to that April fair, and that was such a highlight. So I'm really excited. It's again the same week. We'll also be doing again a cooking class, which is a huge success last year. So I'm glad it's offered this time as well. There's a flamenco evening. We'll be able to watch some flamenco dancing. That was a highlight last year as well. Going to the Alhambra again. Okay, you can scroll to the next. And then we're going to go to Costa del Sol. So we'll go to Malaga. Last year we went to Cadiz. So Malaga, I have been there. It's a beautiful city as well. So I'm excited about that. We're going to Picasso Museum. In Malaga, we're going to be visiting a boat ring, which is a new experience. I think the kids will really enjoy that. And then on day 8, we'll be doing a day at the beach. Something to look forward to because that was everyone's favorite thing we did last year, day at the beach. And we're doing a cable car ride and an olive oil experience, which I'm excited about to see how olive oil is produced. And then we come home on day 9. So the itinerary, it starts on Friday, but it's an evening flight. Unclear yet at what time we would have, maybe we could do a half day, I'm not sure, or maybe you wouldn't have, but I know it's usually an evening flight, but we don't have that flight information. But that's the only day that would overlap with school. We come back on Saturday. And I think and then the sign up process is all very much hands off for me, which I'm very excited about. So it's going to be all done. If you scroll, what's included? Sorry, can you go back? Yeah. So this is all included, the airfare, all transportation, accommodation at hotels, breakfast. And a little different is last year we had every meal included, but they have really encouraged me to have not every lunch included because the kids, some of the places we're going, it's great for the kids to be able to choose where they're going to go rather than have everything prescribed ahead of time. So I said, okay, we'll give it a try. So I said, but I'm not ready for every single day, no lunch included. So we're doing 3 lunches included and the others are traveler's choice. And then continue. Yep, keep going. Thank you. Keep going, keep going. Oh, this was interesting. I asked Lori Holloway, she said she'd never seen this before. I think this is new. Kids could maybe, if they are interested, they can get some credit, some academic credit for this trip. We'll look into more about how this works, but that's something cool for kids to think about if they're interested in doing that. And then payment is done automatically. Payment is done through the website. So keep going. And keep going, please. Keep going. And then, yeah, so that's it. So they would just go to that website, click on there, and they would take care of everything. And I would just watch the enrollments come in and not have to send anything else.
Good plan.
So that's all I have to share with you today. If you have any questions, feel free.
So you're not gonna go to the prom this time?
No, so yeah, that was something interesting that I actually noticed. We are going to go to the Reina, gosh, what's the name of that museum?
Sophia.
Thank you, Reina Sofia in Madrid. And I asked them specifically, why are we going there instead of the Prado? And they said, well, because the Prado is just so vast that we wouldn't be able to do that and the interactive visit in Spain, Madrid, for the market. And I really liked that interactive market experience. So, and then I also asked Marta, who's a Spanish assistant at MISCO, that's a good friend of mine, and she said actually the Reina Sofia is her favorite museum. So I took that, a Spanish person said she prefers that museum, we'll go with the plan.
You had a pretty big group last time.
57 travelers, yeah.
And how many adults was that?
So it was like 13, it was like 13. I don't know if that adds up, but something around there. Immersion kids, non-immersion kids, and adults.
Oh,
Mhm.
the questions? All right, so you want to get a motion to approve the trip to Spain in April 2026?
Motion to approve the trip to Spain in 2026.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Thank you very much for coming out
Fantastic.
tonight.
Thank you so much.
I'm gonna jump into a few updates. Because we are backed up from the last school committee meeting where I didn't do my goals because I was out sick. You will be hearing a lot from me tonight. And so I'll try to go quickly through this portion because we have a few presentations tonight. But we wanted to give you a couple updates related to capital planning. And Jay, jump in at any point too. But we spoke to Christine Lynch. She is the Governance and Facilities Program Manager with DESE. And we spoke to her regarding the process for debt exclusion, local funding that might be outside a regional agreement. One question we asked is, can a town appropriate funds above the percentage split determined by the regional agreement? And the answer we got is yes, they can make a donation, but DESE doesn't encourage it because it impacts net school spending and because doesn't end up being reported in the end of year report. But we got our answer because we didn't know if it could even be done at all.
Why wouldn't we do it? Why would the towns do it?
So for when we get to the budget
We'll see what.
presentation, you'll see that one of our towns
I gotcha.
Yeah.
I'll take it down.
might have funds to share, but because of the balance, so we're trying to figure out how we could make something work.
Okay.
Another question was, if the warrant or ballot questions for debt service fails in either town, can the school committee vote to call a joint town meeting? That's a question that we had, and yes, it's an option under chapter 71, and it's really the same when you have an operational override ballot, and we've gone through that process. So we got that answer. And the third question was, if the school committee does not know if there'll be any assessment related to the debt for capital projects by the open hearing in March, can an assessment be added for debt at a later date? And the answer is yes. When we amend the budget, we typically will amend the budget in August anyways, once we get all of the numbers from the state. So it allows us to use the, I just lost my train of thought, what it said there. So in August, to use the final state budget, we can also add a debt assessment that would have to be approved at each town's fall special town meeting to appropriate the funds to pay the debt service. And so when we kind of get into that and at our upcoming meetings, we can kind of dive deeper into like what are different options and what could happen after the town meetings potentially. Well, those were a few questions that we got answered. We also, for related to some of the capital work, we've met with the firm that's developing cost estimates for the building management systems, paging systems, and they're now also looking at security systems. They're going to provide us with some options for battery storage system in place of a generator for MISCO. That's something that was brought up to look into at the multi-board meeting we were at. The battery storage systems also provide power to the grid during peak load times for which the district would be able to receive payments. There's also options for third party to install these at no cost to the district, and they're going to provide a financial analysis of our options. I know you were all at the multi-board meeting and received the presentation. I think I shared it with you, but I just put it in here in case questions came up or if we just had access to that. Again, I think we may have mentioned this at that meeting, but Jay and I had met with MSBA on a call a couple of weeks ago, and it was for all the school districts and prospective OPMs and firms regarding an accelerated repair program process and next steps. We're pleased to learn that we're one of the 4 out of the 35 plus districts that had completed all the required documentation in time, which I don't know, I like to, meet a good deadline. So it was, what was nice to hear is we thought, okay, then we're going to be assigned the OPM next because they actually have our paperwork, because they mentioned in there that they wouldn't move forward if they didn't have the paperwork. But unfortunately, we're still, we did reach out to inquire as to when we're going to have an OPM assigned, and we're still waiting to hear back from them. They said there was one, this was right before the break, I think. They said they had one more document that they needed to go through their process in order to move forward, and we're still waiting. Did I miss anything in that update, Jay?
Not that I can think of right now.
Okay.
There's something at some point.
All right. Any questions on those?
Good news.
Yeah, so we'll keep you updated, and I know we have upcoming meetings this week as well, and we'll be able to talk more about that. All right, next, Sam, if you don't mind pulling up my presentation for my goals. I met earlier at the beginning of February with the Superintendent Evaluation Subcommittee to share the document, and I also shared it in the background notes for you, my progress report that has all the details on the goals. What I've been trying to do, hopefully successfully, is through the various presentations that we've given in front of the school committee and background notes and my district updates. I've been trying to provide you with updates, so there aren't going to be too many surprises in the mid-year update. And I've just tried to pull out a few highlights, maybe and images of elements that maybe we haven't talked about or you hadn't seen yet. But if there are after I go through it, if there's any questions that you have from the notes, I'm more than happy to go through that. All right, we go through. Thank you. The first slide just outlines the 4 goals. As a reminder, I always have, similar to what all the other administrators and the educators have, we have a professional practice goal, a student learning goal, and what I do is I add in 2 district improvement goals that obviously we're working on all of them, but that I try to focus in on where I know I'm going to be really diving into some of that work and doing a lot with. The first was related to policies and protocols and procedures. Student learning was continuing our work with deeper learning, which we've been spending a lot of time on this year. The third is around developing culturally inclusive learning environments, and that was some feedback from the evaluation last year's to work on our visual environments and to try to make some changes. So that's been a focus for us across the board. And obviously we're spending a lot of time on budget and facility communications and planning, which I know you've received lots of updates on, but we'll go through a couple things. For professional practice, that I pulled some of this from when I came forward at the beginning of the year, where I tell you what the goal is at the top. I outline just to highlight some of the action areas. I didn't put all of it on the slide. And then some of the outcomes that we'd be looking to see would be some updated policies and protocols, district dashboard for resources for administrators, website updates on topics. That's one that I haven't done yet, and I plan to do by the end of the year. And a checklist, internal checklist for document retention. And so I'm going to keep going, but stop me on any of these if you want me to. Next slide, thank you. I give a couple examples in here. So on the left, and now granted, I did this before the February 10th, and we already made some changes in this, and I didn't go through and update it for you. I just kept the same presentation, but you can see going back to all of the B policies. We spent a lot of time on policies. We've made it through all of B, very exciting for us. And a lot of hard work from all of you too. It's not just me, but you know, we've created
Four-year endeavor.
a good system. Well, we did some A work, but and we're started in on the C policies. We looked at the MCAS competency determination, and then I've been hearing about some we're getting a little dizzy with our eyes policies, but we, you know, did a few, and you have a few more coming up. You can see the J's and you can see some of the K's, and we'll continue to do that. But I would say we've made a lot of progress. We did prioritize ones that we knew were outdated, that we knew we needed to make a change. I sent some to our attorneys to have them review around areas like student privacy. Also just, you know, if we know there are federal and state laws that have changed. And then every once in a while, there'll be something that comes up and we say, oh, you know, let's take a look at that policy and that's outdated, and we're working on that. So we are jumping around a little bit more than we have in the past in order to make sure we're more up to date. On the right, it's super small because I couldn't really fit it in, but I have a giant dashboard that is internal that I use with the district leadership team. When I came on board, we started it, and what I've added to it this year are, that's what I did a little screenshot on the bottom, are any of these legal updates. If we create protocols, so I talked about it tonight, we're going to get to acceptable use policy, which will be more policy language, less procedural guideline language. And then what I'll do and work with is creating the procedures. And then where do you store these procedures? I have hard copy now in the main office, which we've never had that, but also we're putting it into the dashboards. And then if it's something that needs to go out to staff or through our memos, we're using that for updates and staff updates.
Cool.
And we notice things we know we need to create, or something might come up like, we don't have a protocol for that. That's written down, right? You may have some past practice, but in the end, after a few years of this work, we'll start to be able to have more protocols that we'll be able to carry over. And some of the areas that we focused on in the last year or two is around residency, student privacy, immigration, 504s, which you'll hear about tonight. Title IX, interesting. We didn't talk about it as a policy, but they just changed. There's going to be a change again with Title IX because every time there's an administration change, the Title IX gets impacted. So we'll have to look at those policies and kind of revert back, and we'll get to that. But there have been trainings with it. Conflict of interest. We're now on an online system for conflict of interest trainings. We did a training with the administrators on how to conduct investigations. We had Roseanne do a presentation and training this summer for them, which has been really helpful. And we have standardized letters and forms that we use that we didn't have before. Records retention, I don't know if I ever talked about it here at a meeting, but I have in conversations. We've had in our district office, there's kind of binders and binders and binders of documents from going back to the beginning of time and Mendon-Upton Regional, which is kind of fun to go through a little bit here and there. But what we're learning is we don't need to hold on. There are certain years that you need to hold on to certain documents. And I put together some information for the district office. And then we have to, if we do get rid of a record, we have to, know what we got rid of, but we were holding on to, let's say, homeschool plans like far past the time we had to, or the conflict of interest far past when you needed to. And so we're chipping. That's going to take forever. And there are some filing cabinets I don't know if we'll ever open, so there'll be stuff still from a long time ago in there, but we're working on that as well. And then cybersecurity, we've talked about that a lot earlier in this year, and we'll have more updates as we go. But this has been, I can't say it's the most fun I've ever had, but it does feel good to know that you have updated policies and procedures and guidelines and that, we want to be following the rules and we do a good job with that. Questions on that before I move on? All right, a little more fun, student learning, and we're just continuing to expand our instructional practices in deeper learning. And some of the action steps were related to our framework for deeper learning, the development, looking at our spaces, look for documents and protocols for observations in classrooms, working on the leveling up protocols, and also trying to see how AI can support deeper learning and support our teachers. And some of the outcomes that you would see would be the framework created and also in practice, administrator walkthroughs that I've done with them with the new protocols, the leveling up, and PD. So if we go to the next slide, I really want to share the ally work at MISCO. We haven't had a presentation on this yet, and I want to make sure they come in and do a presentation towards the end of the year, but hopefully you can see it enough. I wanted to be able to fit 2 examples in there on the left, but what they're working on is in the deeper learning framework is around collaboration, but particularly around academic discourse. And what they've done is work together to develop these cards that you would have in classes and with students in order to help them have prompts for different types of discourse. They created it, they're piloting it in some classes, and something that they'll then present and expand, kind of like what we did at NIPMUC when we were in the ally group, the first year, where they worked in authenticity, then created that protocol, then revised it, then used it again. Same type of thing, like we're creating something that can be used in classrooms. And what's great about Ally, it's everyone else is also working on their own protocol of the other schools, and they share it with us. And the goal is to be able to share out broadly across all of the schools that are interacting with that. But it was great. I saw that right before break. I'm like, oh, this is great. And I wanted to make sure I highlighted it.
We didn't have a student presentation on that?
We did.
Did they on the card?
One of the
Was it on the
counselors.
cards?
Oh, it was the.
Oh, that counts. Yeah, that was a little different, but yeah. But we'll see how much we're using it in the pilot, but either way, I want you to hear about the ally work that they've done. The digital support in the middle, this is a lot of work that Ryan has done, and I shared out links to the technology page so you would see that. There are deeper learning tools and resources that he's put together, digital tools that he's put together. In the last year or so, the website for technology it hadn't been updated. And so that was one of the things that I asked that he could do. And he's spending a lot of time supporting deeper learning work, and particularly through AI as well. On the bottom was just one of the prompts. I just kind of took a little screenshot for you. He had you try one out. He's done it with a portrait of a learner, inspired learning days, lots of different usage, and gets feedback from teachers, and then it tries to revise them. So those have been great. And then finally, you have heard about these, but we have the deeper learning framework, and that we continue to develop and grow. It'll eventually end up on our website, and we'll have a lot of these resources kind of out on our website in the end, once we're using them and they're finalized. And then at our last PD day, which was right before break, so I would have been, was on the 7th, so I would have presented like on the 10th right after. It fresh my mind when I was putting this together, was deeper learning was at the heart of what they were doing in that PD day. And it was great because we had elementary all together, and we had the middle and high school together, and then they had the opportunity to work in departments and work in grade levels and work collaboratively around leveling up their deeper learning and talking about various practices. Questions? Next one, district improvement, goal number 3, around developing culturally inclusive learning environments. I have talked about some of this throughout the year, but a couple of the action steps were the what's in the name activity, analyzing student data with a lens on subgroup data trends. We talked about that around MCAS and some equity pauses that we've been doing. We have been administering climate survey. We did that December. We have not yet done an EDI survey, but the goal was to try to do one of those every couple of years. We had our panorama surveys that we did and analyzed. We have had activities I'll talk about in a second of reviewing school activities for inclusivity and looking at visual indicators of diversity in our community. What you'll see as some outcomes are visual indicators of that. I took a nice picture of all the flags. Do you see all the flags as you walked down the hallway? That's actually one of the outcomes of this work, which I wish I took the picture before. I'd added into my presentation here, but that's one of the things that we've done. We wanted to make sure we were representative of all the cultures and backgrounds of all of our students here. We've been using staff communications to share best practices to begin of the year, talked about positive phone calls home, how to be more inclusive. We're always trying to weave this into our memos. And I've already talked about equity pause. So on the next slide, just a couple of visuals to bring it to life for you. On the left, you have, there's a map that they have set up in the hallway now at Memorial as an example to show where people are from. They also, you had a lot of examples and I took these pictures recently where you had the I am, where everyone kind of shares what they're all about, because I did the I am, you are, we are, kind of like getting to know one another, identity activities at the beginning of the year. You have our classes is a family, you have lots of evidence of that still throughout the school because some of those were recent. But at the other things with school culture inclusivity, it was really great. I observed, I think Marianne and John talked about it, but I observed this activity. They did this equity, inclusion, well-being walkabout, and it was a lead learner meeting. And they went through this protocol and they walked around the building and got feedback from students and teachers and administrators and whoever, you know, decided to come to the lead learner meeting to give feedback on how it could be, we could work on increasing levels in our building. And they've already started making some changes. So that was a really nice activity that they did. And then on the right is a picture from the Sandy Hook Start with Hello assemblies that we had not too long ago. I feel like, I don't remember what month, maybe it was January, but I was able to observe this one. And I thought it was a nice slide where they were talking about like the impact of loneliness, social isolation, because it was about how to include others was in essence. And talking to all the middle school students, I just thought it was excellent. And a good example as well. Questions on this? And finally, what we love to talk about every meeting is how do we improve budget and facility communications and plan better about it. Some of the action steps were, what we've already been doing, collaborating with MSCP on town and field needs, developing consensus on the capital project, which we did by mid-year, have a consultant come in and do a 5-year projection, which we had presented in December, and create new budget presentation formats. I don't know if we did anything new. Did we do anything new? But that's my goal. Yeah, apparently I need to make it good. No, but between now and March 10th,
We will have.
and after this meeting, if they're specific, I'm always looking for feedback because we want to make sure that we're delivering the messages.
Sure. I think it got said last time we were gone.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have continue to have ideas and we'll try to present that. Communication plan for capital projects. I'm going to show you an example of that. Hopefully, we'll have some infographics that we could share for any budget information if needed. We have the 5-year projection and, maybe some new budget reports. If you go to the last page, on the left-hand side, I just took a little screenshot that created like a capital plan project tracking tool. I didn't put everything on it, so goes a lot wider, but just to give you a sense, we had a ton of steps with MSBA and also just, launching the building committee and communicating out. And once we hear back from MSBA, once we move forward on some of these, we're gonna continue to use this. There's another portion that's about communication planning related to how do we get information out, in a more public way. And so we have a number of steps that I have in this document. So every time we meet, I'll be updating it, but it's just a screenshot, just to give you a sense of some of the work that we're doing for that. And then on the right, you can see all the meetings that we've had so far. And I can keep adding some in as we head into next month's on this.
So are you making that project planning or project tracking document public, or is that something you're maintaining?
It's something I'm maintaining, yeah. To manage the steps that we have. Also, once we start to get more information, so Jay reaches out, we might get a new quote coming in to kind of be able to track and be able to share it or share, with all of you once we have that information and with the building committee, once we are able to be at that stage to be launching that, it would be something to help us internally as well. And that's what I had. Questions?
No, really good. It's good. This is probably, I'll just make this very short so it doesn't take much time, but there's a critical aspect of what we're doing in terms of the capital planning situation and the marketing of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like we should have something written down with the project plans for getting that done. And I'm sure you've got that information. I just don't know enough about it.
Yeah,
I don't
so
know who's
that's
taking
my
point
other
on it.
tab of the communication planning for it.
Yeah.
It's not complete. So one example is we just prior to the break and met with MUCP. We're coming back, they're meeting tonight. I'm scheduling a meeting with them on the messaging, which they said they wanted to invite you to that, where we're trying to, they want to be able to have like what their standard message can go out. And then what I'm doing for stuff that I can do, for example, like there'll be something tomorrow. I have the superintendent community circle. See who comes, if anybody comes, but it'll be advertised that I'm going to talk about capital budget, strategic goals. If anyone comes, I'll have kind of a smaller presentation to be able to give an overview of what's going on to smaller groups,
So
PTO
my
groups
apologies,
or
where's
whatever.
that?
Yeah,
Where's that?
the circle, the
Yeah, the
superintendent
circle,
circle,
yeah.
that will be in the gathering room tomorrow night at 6:30. I had one before break, no one showed up, which is probably a good thing because I was still sick, but I did come. But
So is that an email to everybody in the district?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't get that.
yeah, well, it's going out tomorrow morning, a reminder. It was in the newsletter.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's in the newsletter.
Yeah, but it's also, there's a playoff game tomorrow night, basketball. It's gonna be busy. But we'll see, but then,
Your thing is before the basketball game starts,
well, I think the game's at
Little-
6,
Oh,
right?
it's at
I think the
6.
games are at 6, yeah.
Like 6.
Yeah, mine's at 6:30. I just randomly picked 6:30 for all of my sessions. But so I have kind of the things that I'll be doing. MUCP are actively working on some of the communication marketing, and then it's something we're going to talk about at our meeting on Wednesday as well.
I see it as a discussion item.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, sure.
My turn.
It's your turn.
You see my goodness. All right, little intermission.
Actually.
Thanks for having me. And really the purpose of me spending a little bit of time with you, in addition to kind of breaking things up a little, is to share some really good news that I think is really important and timely news. So I have the privilege of one of the hats that I wear is working with a bunch of educators that are 504 team. And so I figured it would be a good chance to share a little bit about the work that we are doing as a PLC, professional learning community, and why we're doing that as a professional learning community. And then a little bit about kind of what's in the news right now and
what section 504 is, just for folks that it might benefit. So that's the purpose of this. And here's the team. And you can see that we have educators at every school that wear the hat of 504 coordinator for the school. And in addition to that, all school principals are responsible for the coordination of 504 plans. And I kind of help oversee stuff. So we make sure that folks are trained and that the services that we're providing and families' questions are answered through that kind of structure. The structure is important, and you can stay there, Sam. The structure is important because I think one of the points that I want to make sure resonates is that 504 plans are proliferating. And it is one of these things that ends up becoming an important service that we're expected to provide as a public school district, and more in line with regulations that actually weren't intended for 50 section 4 exactly, but they fall out that way because of the way that different issues are remediated and stuff like that. So I think that's an important thing for folks who run public schools and oversee public schools, because it impacts funding, obviously, it impacts responsibilities on educators, and it impacts services that we provide as well. Awesome team. We've got an awesome team. If you go to the next slide, here's a little.
Let me ask kind of maybe the obvious question. Since we put that slide up there, are we missing folks at NISCO?
Oh, well, that's another good point. So we're not missing folks because Robin and Nick actually are serving as the 504 coordinators for this year. But importantly, this district operates to support 504 plans through stipended roles.
Okay.
And so in an instance where there isn't somebody who wants to apply for that role, it does put us in a position where we have to figure out how to provide these services. And in this particular case, the conversation was had that Robin and Nick would kind of fill this role for this year. And we've had some other changes too. It's not just at NISCO. But that's also one of the reasons why we need a PLC, right? Because we need to be able to bring folks together where they can ask questions, where we can kind of work as a community to make sure that our services are provided consistently. And it also is important in terms of potentially how we think about moving forward. So the purpose of 504 is really, I like to say it like this, to level the playing field. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was an act that was put into place effectively to make sure that that folks with disabilities were not discriminated against, basically. And there's some amazing documentaries on like the 4 years in between when this law was passed and when actually folks started enacting the safeguards to support folks with disabilities that I highly recommend. But this is where the law effectively and our responsibility originates. And it's really important because the idea of an impairment has changed a lot over time, and especially in recent years. And that also impacts how the kinds of services that we need to think about providing students when an impairment may impact a life function in the school setting, that's our responsibility. And so here are the criteria for a 504 eligibility, and they basically boil down to having a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity within the school setting. And so what our responsibility becomes then is that if a student meets that criteria, is to ask ourselves, how can we accommodate the student's disability to level the playing fields, to enable them access to the curriculum like their non-impaired peers, so that they can function in school without any discrimination, basically. So that's how we kind of frame it. And if you go further, sometimes people have questions about like, well, what is this in comparison to like an IEP, right? And that's a really good question. And they affect essentially the supports that are provided through based on two different laws, basically. they end up kind of distinguishing themselves. This is going to be like a very thumbnail version, but I think it's like a good kind of, this is how to understand it in terms of like differences in purpose, services, and eligibility. And so the purpose, as I said before, for 504 is to guarantee equal access, to level the playing field. And for an IEP, it is to identify students who actually may need individualized, specially designed services or supports. And it's also based on that goes down to eligibility, them needing that and to impact their educational performance, so that there is essentially a determination that a student is not making effective school progress in order to qualify for an IEP. And in the case of a 504, a student may be doing okay, but may need some support to level the playing field in a different way, some type of life activity that isn't just how their academics are panning out for them. And then in terms of services, which I kind of skipped over, it's about for 504 plans, it's about removing barriers in the school setting. So that's how we think about it. And always the question is like, what could we do again to enable a student to have the same access to anything that we offer? And it doesn't just, when I say the school setting, it doesn't just have to be in the school, it could be on the playing field as well. So 504 is something that kind of pertains to all of the services that we provide students. In terms of trends, this is, I think, an important slide that kind of like tries to put a lot in one place. But Section 504 isn't specifically funded. And people would say that the IEPs aren't either, not at least the way that they were intended. They've never reached the funding levels that they were expected to when initially when IDEA was passed. It's important to note because with the proliferation of 504s, it becomes effectively another responsibility for public schools that we all have that aren't particularly funded in this context where we're talking about funding being limited and governmental resources maybe not existing that used to exist. But all states have 504 students on 504 plans. It's like across the country. And they have increased in the last decade, and particularly since the pandemic, in many regards because of the increase of mental health impairments, which are accommodated through 504 sometimes, and if necessary, and that these it's also important that you know that these plans are subject to review the same as IEPs are. And I think that's important too, because even though there are different concepts, when there is a question about the process, we also have to respond to those questions the same way we would for IEPs. And there are a lot of resources that go into that process. And we have kind of structured ourselves so that we, in some ways, follow IEP guidelines for timelines and our processes in terms of the documentation that we use. Because when there are questions, we want to be able to show that our process is ironclad, even though technically there aren't regulations for the 504 processes. But I think that's also important too, because the Office of Civil Rights is what this law is all about, making sure that that students aren't discriminated against. One recent kind of headline is that there is a national lawsuit right now involving, I think, 19 states that are effectively asking for 504 to be considered unconstitutional. And I think that is important too, just to raise up, because I think for families of students with disabilities, it creates some fear. Like, what's going to happen to my student if Section 504 is determined to be unconstitutional? And so in this space where we're doing all this work with these amazing educators to support students, I was like, we just have to make sure that folks know we're committed to this. It's not about what's happening in the courts right now. It's about making sure that students with disabilities aren't discriminated against, which is something that we have a responsibility to do as civil rights purveyors, basically. So, that was a message that I just thought was important to say in light of what I imagine are some questions out there in the community. So that's basically it. I wanted to share with you, there's a link on that side of the slide to a guidebook that we're putting together in this PLC. We're putting together a guidebook for families that kind of share the highlights of what Section 504 is all about, and eligibility criteria, what they would expect through the process of essentially having an evaluation and determining if their student is eligible for a 504 plan. And we've also created a coordinator version so that there's more of like guidance in terms of checklists and documentation, so that we have that for some of the things that Maureen was just talking about. And then we are hoping to network with other districts. As a matter of fact, some of the great ideas in our version came from other districts. And so we're hoping to kind of get our 504 teams together. And we'll get these resources up on the website so they're easily accessible to families. But that's kind of just a little bit about what we're doing this year. So there you go. So that's your intermission.
It's a little mind-boggling to me that 17 states feel that 504 is unconstitutional. But I'm going to put you on the spot, and I probably don't know the answer to this, but what's the time frame from starting 504 plan to actually getting a student, receiving services versus an IEP?
Well, that's an interesting question because, like I said, there aren't kind of timeframes associated with Section 504. However, because 504 plans can be, issues can arise from them, and that we're subject to effectively ensuring that we're showing that we're doing right by families and students, we adopt special ed timelines. So when a referral comes in, we try our best to get a response back out to the family within about 10 days. Okay, which is a process that they use for IEPs. We have a 45-day evaluation period so that during that time we can, if there are, and there may not be major need for evaluations, but if there are, we have the time to be able to conduct them. And sometimes what even happens is that the process will then go through the consideration of whether a student qualifies for an IEP. And the evaluations will happen. And then if the answer is no, they don't qualify for an IEP, then we'll consider their disabilities separately under 504.
So it's sort of baited because my two girls had IEPs for speech therapy, and I was a little frustrated with the time frame and the whole process because it was very defined. Do the evaluation, 30 days, meet as a whole team, you have a team assembled to figure out the IEP. And I thought this is kind of crazy business. I mean, it's speech therapy. Yes, it's very obvious. We agree. There's no real point of this whole defined process.
Mm-hmm.
Just start with speech therapy.
Yeah.
So if there's a way we can streamline getting kids to services faster.
Yeah. Well, and can I say something on that point that I don't know if it is at all like related to the circumstance that you've experienced, but I do think that one of the things that is challenging in these spaces is like you really actually do need processes that we follow, partly because all of these all of the questions we're answering have to do with civil rights. And so what we can't do is fast track or consider differently like one family's request from another in terms of like a process. Now, when I said it before, like there are some situations where like for 504s, right? This isn't IEPs, okay, but for 504s, we would be able to say, okay, everything points to this disability impacting the student's life function in the school setting. Let's quickly assemble the team because we can't skip that process, have a conversation about it, and craft a plan. We have a little bit more flexibility in that. than they do for the IEP process. So.
And that's kind of what I'm saying, like, always you gotta dot your i's, cross your t's, but at the same time, the most important thing is getting the services for the kid as quickly as possible, right? The earlier, the faster, the better. So if there's a way to do that, to provide those services, not necessarily skipping the whole process, fast tracking, like favorites or that, but right, trying to get the provided services to the kids faster.
Yep, I hear you.
Without making it too much of a loaded question or a long question.
Like
everyone's
both
like-
of you,
you're
I
like,
started your
wow.
questions
Yeah.
like that. It's a good thing I came with my Wonder Woman bracelet on today.
We all sit here with backwards experience, whatever. I never knew, I kind of assumed 504 was a state thing, not a federal thing or something. I learned something tonight. How's that? Does Massachusetts DESE have a lot to do in between the federal government and recommendations to the school systems, or is it almost all fed to schools?
Oh, no, it's not all fed to schools.
Like guidelines, how you implement, how you do, I guess, this is just a high level, well, it's just kind of simple. It says the federal government make guidelines, then each state can enact how they
It
feel
depends on what
appropriate.
category it's in. So there are some, like you can answer on the 504, but I mean, there's tons of info from Massachusetts and guidelines for IEPs, right? There's like, you know, we go to Massachusetts for a lot of those resources, even though it's coming off of some of the federal rules. So we tend to have a lot. I don't know if there's as much 4 or 504 from DESE, that's more federal.
Well, here's
Right,
how
like,
I think
for
about
the-
it. I'm not like
Yeah.
distinguishing, but like what I feel like happens at the federal level is they'll say something like, you need a process for X, and then the states figure out what their process is.
Yeah.
And so in Massachusetts, we have a process, for example, for like determining whether an issue that's raised is a legitimate issue or not. And we go through this PRS process, basically. And that, I'm sure, doesn't exist the same way in other states, right? But I'm sure every state has to have their own process for it, whatever it is. So those are things that I think make a big difference, state to state, that aren't like specified at the federal level, but they're required at a certain level.
Makes sense. The answer's so.
And then to your point too in question, there may be some federal laws that come in, but we may have Massachusetts guidelines that give more rights. Can't be less, right, than what the federal says, but we're fortunate in Massachusetts that we do get a lot of support in different areas as well.
See, a lot of that is the federal government doesn't really have any constitutional authority over education in the states.
Right.
So it's compliance by funding. You don't get the funding
That's
if you
right.
don't comply. In an area where you have no funding.
Right, so
it's
there's
sort
no
of a
funding here.
guideline That the states have to figure out.
Right. Which I think goes back to.
And we'll get to, there is a slide when we get to the budget, really, you know, on grants, just to give you a highlight again of like what federal funding, grant funding we have and how it, you know, could be impacted too.
Well, speaking of which, we talk about the fiscal year 26 budget.
Do it. Thank you for the permission.
Yeah, I think we should.
Jay, you wanna come? You are,
Working on it.
right. So you have heard all of the departmental and school budget presentations and
What?
this is.
There's no more?
No more.
What are we gonna do?
So now you
Oh,
just,
make one of those sessions.
No, seriously.
now you just get us. What you asked for.
You want another one?
Actually,
So he's here to present for central office.
I'd like to make the couple for next year.
all right, so if you could go to the next slide. I just want to give a highlight of
Oh.
some
All
of
the favorite slide.
my
There we
favorite
are.
slide, budget development, to
we
show
are.
us where we're at. You can see that we are at the end of our budget presentations prioritization project process and right before the budget hearing, which will be our next meeting in March. I always like to have this slide here. I'm not going to read through it, but all the links to the other presentations I put in here just for ease. All of it is also located on our budget website, which you can access. And this is more for community, anyone who might be watching or wanting to know, but you can get to the budget website even from like the main bar. It says budget, you can click and it will bring you to all these presentations. This one I haven't put up there yet because we haven't presented it yet, but will be added in the next couple of days as well. But what you have is a budget timeline broken down where at the beginning of the year, we establish our calendar, what it's going to look like. And then we give some highlights in the fall and financial updates here at school committee. We give our documents out to our leadership team and give them a deadline right before Thanksgiving to give their budget proposals to Jay and I. And then in the following, in about the first 2 weeks of December, they come and present and make their strong arguments to us on what the requests are. We usually at that time, right after that, we usually give an update to the budget subcommittee of what those initial requests are. They're not all put together in the budget. Then Jay kind of puts them all together so we can see where we're at. And then we usually do another budget subcommittee in January just to see where we're at, which is around the time of when we get the governor's budget, which we'll talk about in a second. In that month of January and February, we round out all of the departmental, because that's something we added in since I've been superintendent. I think it's nice for you to hear directly and ask some questions and hear some of the arguments from the schools. I know we can't always do what they're asking for, but it's helpful for kind of building the longer story about what our needs are in the district over the course of the years. And here we are in February, and then we have the budget hearing. Go to the next one.
So kind of stating the obvious, but just for everybody here, right?
Yeah.
So tonight's the last night before the open budget.
Yeah.
Right, that will be the next meeting.
Exactly. And I also put this out there, we've been trying to be, we've always been transparent. So we've never been hiding anything in the past years or anything, but we're trying to be more transparent where you can show the community that this isn't just, we decided today to come up with this budget. It is a process that takes place throughout the entire year and leads up to these key moments, but we'll continue past the budget hearing as well as we work on finalizing it. Next slide. Thank you. Some guiding principles in the FY26 budget. Number one, we always try to come back to student-centered decision-making, making sure that we are making decisions in the best interest of all of our students' needs, academically, socially, emotionally, behaviorally, and that even though we're always being fiscally responsible and we're always looking at what the community wants, and we're always looking at what teachers might ask for, and we're balancing everything, right? But when it gets hard, we then check ourselves and we say, is this what's best for students or not, and balancing that out. Second, we have been focused on maintaining our level services, that we're not having any major reductions in our services, even though we've had, gaps in a lot of our budgets that we have to close the shortfall every year, but we don't want to have a negative impact on students, going back to that, number one. And we also have had some targeted needs. You hear the presentations that have all of our needs that we've identified, and some remain the same over the course of the years. You hear the same request over and over and over again because it's still a need. And you have some that it varies because different things pop up. But we keep an eye on our strategic priorities and try to target and continue to make at least some improvement within the budget as well. And then thirdly, we have a focus on, and I've been trying to have, strong fiscal stewardship and the transparent communications that I talked about, that we, even though we have this range of additional requests that we know will have a positive impact on students and student learning, we also want to balance our operational needs with our capital investment needs this year. And we also want to work collaboratively and continue to work collaboratively with the towns and town officials so they also can meet their needs as well.
I just have to say, that slide is a very dramatic difference in the way that we approach positioning this to the community. from when I first got on the school committee. So I really appreciate positioning for that. That's a really good way to do it. So it has been done differently in the past, and it's caused some confusion in people I've talked to in the community. So that's perfect.
Yeah.
Stressing the maintaining level service, I think it's the right way to go.
And that's what we've tried to do, but I will say it is hard for me sometimes because when everyone's coming forward and advocating, and I know, like, if we had this, or if we could do this, like the difference it would make, but it is also number 3, you know, we're maintaining, we're targeting, like, I understand the context that we're in, but it's a hard balance because you want to keep going back to what's best for our students. So they all come into play, and a lot of this has stayed the same when I've gone back to like previous years and thinking about what we talked about in our principles, but this has changed a little bit too. We know this year a big focus is on some of the capital needs, right? And so we're approaching the budget a little differently as a result, I think, this year. Next slide, we have the initial budget goals. For the purposes of the budget hearing on the 10th, if you think you can't visually see it at an angle, please let me know. I'll change it. I was trying to mix it up a little bit, but I have three categories for our budget goals. Obviously, maintaining and excelling in our high quality curriculum instruction for students. We want to make sure that we have level services in the budget to maintain our class sizes, programs, instruction services that we're currently providing, that we need to provide, right? Sometimes we may not continue to provide something, but that's a choice that we're making in order to reallocate to higher priorities, right? Secondly, we're still continuing our work in the multi-tiered systems of support and focusing on critical academic, social, emotional, behavioral needs of our students. That's through some of the support staff that we've added throughout the years, bringing in, consultants, building some programs for students, some PD we've provided, and also a lot of our work in the data assessment inquiry work that you've heard a lot about over the last couple of years. And thirdly, and then thirdly, we have a lot of the focus on deeper learning, future ready, preparing our students, making sure that we are growing, expanding their connections to the portrait of a learner competencies, and having authentic learning experiences embedded in what we're doing. Question?
I was just going to say that MTSS is sort of a education jargon.
Yeah.
So you might want to just describe a little bit.
Okay. I almost thought of changing the title, but I kept it the same as last year because it is about those systems of support, but I can think about it too when we present it like on Wednesday as well. So factors impacting prioritization. At the top of this grid, I did not change anything from previous years. One thing that I just talked about with the fiscal stewardship is, we take into account in our priorities, financial considerations, the revenue limitations that we have in the towns. We think about stability, sustainability over the course of the years. We've been trying to stretch out our money and the grant funds that we had and go as long as we can without ever needing an operational override, but also saying at some point, we're getting to that cliff that we'll talk about at the end of this. But we also want to make sure we're always aligned to our strategic goals. So if any of those goals need, a lot of our goals, we don't have a ton of financial commitment embedded in them on purpose, but sometimes we do need some of that support, and we want to maintain, be true to our strategic goals. And then there's always the ongoing community input around our goals, our expectations from our community, high quality instruction, safety, college career readiness, programmatic choices, opportunities. In past surveys, that's what we heard, that when people anecdotally ask for things or talk about things, that still seems to align. We already know our school's strategic goals, so I won't mention them, but that's what I kind of just went through. We have fixed costs and mandated programming. We have our student support delivery, our curriculum instructional resources, which we can't go without. We have our tech infrastructure and devices. We talked about replacement needs, and then in operations, our building grounds, transportation, which we'll mention what those drivers are for this year. On the bottom, we have slightly different challenges and variabilities that we will talk about. The limited town revenue, there is not enough town revenue to meet what is being requested and what our needs are for our budget this year. We still have the fixed costs increasing. I think that will always stay that. It's never going to really go down. We have the threat of reduced federal funds. We won't know about that until July or later on in the year, but it is possible. And we are a big challenge in variabilities. We're going to need to increase our use of our reserves, and we'll talk about that as well. But that's a risk for the future. Right. Next slide. Another way that, and I'm a visual learner, so I like my visuals here. Hopefully it helps others, but we never want to be in that below that bottom line of reduced services. We want to maintain our level services and then look for whatever targeted needs are above that second line. And we identify a few critical needs, some strategic investments and programmatic enhancements to make us competitive. As the superintendent of the school district, I'm the #1 advocate, and I'm sure you are too, as school committee members as well, for having a competitive district, of being the best district we can, school district we can for our students. They deserve the best. And it's hard sometimes to not be able to add some of these things in, but we have made some improvements over the course of the years, and our strategic plan has really helped with us moving forward, I believe. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all of this, but just to give you a sense of this, and you will hear this again, at our budget hearing, but on the left, we have the staffing requests that have come in, organized by this hierarchy of level services, needs-based, strategic, and competitive. On the right-hand side isn't everything. I didn't pull everything in yet from what you had in all the presentations, but you have on the right, level services of, continuing PD or some replacement of textbooks that are outdated that we have to have. The needs-based on the right, we have smart board, projector replacements, iPads. We had talked about that. And a few digital resources as well. And then at the top, continued technology infrastructure investment, improved field investments, music instrument expansion, student furniture upgrades have been requested, which they are currently cut. A lot of those are cut out, are not the classroom libraries to expand them. A lot of those have been cut out at the top there, but that's what's been, if you go back to previous years, some of the things that have been in there. For level services, for staffing, we'll talk about like the top 3 for enrollment would be the ELA teacher for MISCO, math teacher MISCO, and a Spanish immersion teacher for Clough, because we'll be bringing in another, looks like we'll be bringing in another kindergarten for SI to, we'll eventually have those strands at full. We had reduced in previous years. Sometimes it's hard to remember what we did like the year before, that's why I have the principals share reductions, so we can always go back and you can see where we've reduced in staff. And sometimes those reductions can stay in place, and other times they'll put in and say, no, we need that now. This is one instance where we had that bubble class that came through. We were able to have some savings because some people were retiring and leaving. So we just didn't fill those positions. So it didn't impact the current staff. That's what we try to avoid. But we have a larger class coming up into that 8th grade. And so right now that remains in the budget. Now, as we go through and continue throughout our budget process, we also will be looking for other places so we don't need to add a position that we can maybe move and reallocate, but for now it's in there. And then everything above, you've heard about the tech support needs, the potential expansion of EL teachers. There have been requests. We did have reductions in special educators at MISCO, so they've requested for them to be back. Memorial is anticipating they might need a grade 1 teacher, but they don't know yet. That's enrollment, so that's kind of in the top 5 potentially, for positions for all of that were asked. I'm going to keep going, but we can come back to this too if you have specific questions. It just gives you a sense of how we kind of prioritize and order it. Right, so we're gonna start in on the expenditure budget. And I'm gonna hand this over to you, Jay, to speak to some of these, and I'll jump in as needed.
Okay. All right, so initially, this is just how our budget as it stands right now breaks out based on the state function codes. I do this every year just to show you when the state looks at our budget, this is what they're seeing. So it breaks out that way. If you go to the next slide, I broke it out based on salaries, benefits, and some of the other major expenditure areas. You know, again, we're using 77% of our budget goes towards staff, employees, and in the fashion of, you know, salaries and benefits. Obviously, they're the most important piece to what we do is the staff. That just breaks it out by function codes. The drivers that we have this year, salaries, not counting any of the new positions that have been talked about, are up about 1.1 million. Health insurance, and we'll talk about that in a second, in the budget right now is a 6% increase. Lane changes, that really surprised me this year. Typically, on an annual basis, our lane changes add up to about 40 or 45,000. This year it was 150,000. What that means is teachers are taking classes, getting further certification. It's to their advantage to do it. It's to our advantage to do it. But it was a big, much larger than I thought it was going to be when I finally put it into the budget.
That's for this current year, not.
That's for FY26. Not FY, not, we're in FY25 now, that's for next year. So when I do the budget, they're required to tell us they might be eligible for a lane change by February 1st. If they tell us that, I put it in the budget, because if I don't, and then they do get the lane changes, we don't have the money to pay it. So I tend to budget for it. Then if it turns out they don't get it and they don't get the lane change, then there's a little bit of extra money in those accounts. But you have to be on the conservative side there, because you got to make sure you cover it. Transportation is under contract. It's a little under $100,000. Quite honestly, a 4% increase. What I'm hearing from other districts is they're looking at 8 to 12%. So I think we're doing okay there.
Yeah, I was at a meeting, that's.
Yeah.
Much better.
Instructional supplies looks like a large percentage, but it's only $57,000. So just that when you know, percentages are a relative thing. Maintenance is pretty much level funded. Worcester retirement, we got a break, I think, this year, even though it's $42,000. It's typically been $100,000 a year for like the last 8 years. So that's a good sign. So those are the key drivers that are pushing on our budget. If you look at the salaries in and of themselves, instruction is about $20 million. The support staff, admin assistants, tech support, a little over $1 million. Maintenance is a little over $1 million. Administrators about 1.9 million. The net increase in salaries, though, is 1,292,000, puts our total salaries at 24,883. So that's more than 50% of our budget, 54% based on the previous pie chart. It's not going to be National Pie Day at the open hearing, is it? We'll have to do more pie charts. There were 5 positions that we kind of identified and prioritized that we still would need to add into the budget after we make some decisions, but they total up about 336,000. Maureen just talked about those, about the various needs. The last 2, the grade 1, the severe needs teacher, we haven't made a final decision on yet.
And the memorial would only be if the enrollment in kindergarten went up so
Right.
much. So we won't know that yet, but that's why a request came in, because it's possible.
All right, on the health insurance piece, we, as you know, we changed into this group called the Mass Strategic Health Group, and they used to do their claims processing. The medical administrator was a company called HPI, which is a subsidiary of Harvard Pilgrim that has not worked out very well. HPI doesn't pay its bills on time, is what we've learned very quickly. The group as a whole voted in December to eliminate HPI and go back to Harvard Pilgrim as our claims processor, medical administrator. I believe that's a really positive thing. We've been with Harvard Pilgrim for 20 plus years. They know how to do their stuff. They pay their claims. So that's going to happen for sure. Our loss ratio as of through December, actually it might be through January, is at 82%. The last time they gave me a number, it was 59%. What's happened is in the month of December and January, they started paying all these claims that hadn't been paid off full. Great that they're paying claims finally, but the downside is that, of course, it affects our renewal rate. I would like to see us get a renewal of around 2%. We currently have a budget of 6%, but I was told Friday that they're recommending now that people consider 9 as their first budgetary number. I haven't talked to them since then. The difference between 6 and 9 is about another $100,000. I'm going to argue on that one a little bit because even at 82%, that's a pretty good loss ratio. But I get it. So we're going to have to still work that out. So that's a variable that we're still, we still have to work through. On the revenue side, state revenue, chapter 70 was actually pretty good, $75 a student. Transportation went up a little bit. That's great. Charter went up, so did the cost per charter school. So that kind of wipes it out. But in general, we're looking at about $361,000, about a 2.5% increase in state aid. What I was told by our state reps when I talked to them maybe a couple weeks ago is that the House and Senate budget will only go up. It won't go down. So I think this is our base. I'm hoping that they get chapter 70 up to 100 or so, which would be a little extra money. Transportation, I'm hoping they're going to get a little bit better on as well. It all depends on where they think the revenue is on the state level. But that's our state aid right now. Here's just some trends on chapter 70. You can see that we really rake in the money when chapter 70 comes out. We average about 0.75% increase on an annual basis. So they're really coming through in that. But we are a minimum aid district. We haven't reached, Mendon has reached target share, Upton has not, but we don't have enrollment growth. And until we have either enrollment growth or an influx of low income population, our chapter 70 isn't going to vary much.
Do we have to go, does the enrollment have to go to the previous level that you're funded at for the whole harmless?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not just enrollment growth, it's getting back to the.
Well, not only that, but if we want to see a larger increase in chapter 70, we need to be adding more than like previous years. And we need to be adding 50, 75, 100 kids a year, which isn't happening right now. I mean, we're pretty much, our enrollment has been relatively flat. The regional transportation reimbursement, I gave you about a 7-year history of what the reimbursement rate was. You can see back in 21, we were at 96%. That's great. It's supposed to be 100, but 96, I'll take it. We're at 72% this year. Right now, it's projected to be at 77% for next year. I'm hoping they're going to do better with that, but we haven't had any indication. The House budget comes out probably mid-April, so it'll be after your open hearing. The Senate budget usually comes out in June, May or June. Governor signs the budget supposedly by July 1, but it's typically been the end of the month before we get anything. Circuit breaker is another thing. Now, circuit breaker obviously is based on the number of kids you have out of district, but even though our numbers have come down dramatically, the cost for sending kids out of district and transportation has increased dramatically. So that number you see for FY25 is what we're receiving this year in circuit breaker, and we're a year ahead. So that's what we can offset tuitions next year with. We tend to get a year and a half, and it gives us a locked-in number for a budgetary number. On the local side, and this is where we get into what we were referring to earlier tonight, the enrollment percentages, Mendon has dropped 1% from 25 to 26. Upton is gone up by 1%. So there's a little bit of shift there, which does impact how things play out when we balance out the numbers. On the local side, the minimum contribution for Mendon is only up $120,000, while Upton is up $631,000. That's great, except that Upton doesn't have $631,000 of new money that they can give us, because that's like all of their new money. They would have to start cutting their town hall staff, or they would have to lay off people to fund that. They have given us right now a net increase when you take all three of $351,000, which they're going to try to improve. But because of that, Mendon is going to get a reduction of $177,000 from 25 to 26. It's because of how the regional agreement is balanced out. You take all the predetermined amounts out of your budget. The rest is split by the enrollment percentage. That's unfortunate. So that's where Mendon has come to us and said, well, if we wanted to give you $100,000, can we do that? It is against the regional agreement, but there is a way to do it if we really want to push on that. I had a couple of ideas. I met with Elena and Jeremy Stull, who's the town administrator, this morning. We talked through a couple of things. Desi does not like that concept. I mean, what I was told by Chris Lynch was, we don't really encourage it. We kind of don't like it, but we know it happens. So there is that option, but as it stands right now, Mendon's getting a reduction, Upton's got a $350,000 increase. Upton was gonna try to see if they could add 125,000 to that, which would bring Mendon up a little bit further. But right now, that's where the local aid stands. So our local aid, the thing that's happened is we've always said Chapter 70 isn't gonna bail us out. It's all gonna be on the local government. But we're only getting less than a 1% increase on the local side because they don't have the money. At least Upton doesn't in this case. Mendon, I think, probably could fund us even at a 0%. But that would put Upton's numbers up to like 550,000, which again is pushing them.
And this has happened multiple times in the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, it happened once before, a couple of years ago. Yeah, it's been, but it always skews it. The fact that the minimum contributions are so skewed like that.
Yeah.
And part of that is because Upton's not a target share and Mendon is.
Yeah.
But it, it's just the way it is. So this is where the local aid plays out for right now. If we go to the district side, as you know, we have these are increases here, not total amounts. We have a shared tech position, and because salary is going up, because health insurance is going up, they pick up 50% of that cost. So that's going to add around $5,000. We're increasing our interest appropriation. I worked with the bank about a year ago and said, look, you're not paying us enough interest for an account with $14 million or $12 million. They upped it so we can add more into it. We used to earn like $10,000 a year in interest. This year, we're over 100,000 already. So we've increased that. We maybe even could be more flexible. The risk is that I don't know where interest rates are going to be in a year. So I don't want to say, oh yeah, let's put it all in and then have rates drop way back down. I know you're going to ask this because I was already asked this. The Medicaid reimbursement, when you see it's going up $71, that's only because last year, once they released the budget for this current fiscal year, they changed the minimum contributions very slightly. And when they do that, it skews the assessments to the town, which we can't change. So I needed to offset it to make those assessments the same by reducing something in one of our district accounts. I chose Medicaid and cut it by $71 to make the budget balance. So I rounded it back up to a pure 85,000. That's the purpose of it. I know that 71 is going to take us far, but you never know. But so our district funding is up about 95,000. School choice. Now, school choice is one of the accounts we're probably going to tap into. Let's shift on.
Oh, yeah, you gotta do this. Did you do that?
Which one?
You skipped one.
27.
27. I skipped 27. Oh, that's the total budget. Okay, yeah. Yeah, forget it.
3 power slides.
Yeah.
Summed up.
All right, so this puts it all together, state aid, local aid, district funding. Right now, the revenue increase is $715,000, about a 1.75% increase. That's not very good when you look at the needs and just the cost of everything. But right now, that's where it stands. If Upton can come up with a little bit more money, if the state comes up with a little bit more money, we can maybe get that, 2.25%, 2.5%, which would immensely help the shortfall that you're going to see soon. School choice, we're doing exceptionally well. You can see if you go back, this was about an 11-year history, but you can see that blue line has gone up over the last 5 or 6 years, and that red line has gone down. That's because people want to come here, and we've got the space to fit them in. What that does is, on the next slide, I'm going to show you the bottom line is what I think is the important line here. It basically shows you where we started and ended, but the bottom line is what we profit from school choice, where in FY21 it was 390,000. This year it's going to be 725,000. That's a great support mechanism for the budget. It's also allowed us to build up reserves over these years, which we're going to need to use at some point very soon.
Somehow these numbers, like in a simple way, almost also need to be in the capital planning stuff for the capital.
The choice numbers or just?
Yeah, the choice numbers, not the numbers, but the 700,000. It's
Yeah.
like, at the end of the day, a little off track here, but you don't invest in a roof, you let the building degrade. You're gonna lose your, there's a snowball effect.
Exactly,
Yeah. Your facilities and.
Well, those that remember way back to 2010 and 2011, we had some major issues. That was the first thing we took a hit on with school choice. It absolutely does. And you have to be strategic in how you do it. And I think we've done fairly well in that. You don't take a whole bunch of kids that require you to hire 4 teachers, but you spread it out and you do it strategically.
Yeah.
and you can do well by it. And we will always have kids that will choice out. We will always have to pay for them regardless of whether we're a choice district or not. The
Yeah.
question is whether we accept those in and get money in return.
Yeah, we voted this week.
Oh, yeah. So stop selling it, is that what you're saying?
What is the relative enrollment numbers across the 54 schools for incoming school years? Is it? like roughly?
Fluff is the highest, Nipmuc is probably next, Memorial is almost nothing, and Nisco is,
Yeah, so like for Nipmuc, generally, at least last few years, we've had only take people in as freshmen, students in as freshmen. And it's been less than 10 spots that we've opened up.
Is it once they're in the district, they can stay in the district?
Yep.
all that
Yes.
From
Yeah.
school to school?
Yeah.
So they don't have to reapply
No,
there once they
no,
apply to get. into
Yep,
this-
so
this-
once you take them, you have them forever. And but it's helpful when you have the opportunity to do it at transitions, if you have enough room in fifth, like, people might be leaving, come to a new school, particularly at ninth grade. But we don't take, seniors, juniors, but what else? Then we looked at, particularly, we had that lower bubble class coming through. And so then we had more, spots. We didn't necessarily fill them all, but in the middle school, because we had the room for it. And then Memorial, because of the growth at Memorial, there really haven't been any openings in the last number of years there, but Clough, there's still been space, a lot of space.
especially as the enrollment percentages are shifting again. It seems like Upton is growing quite a bit, Mendon is still kind of flat as far as its enrollment growth. Our school choice revolving account, just so you can kind of see what we've done. We've appropriated, close to $1 million pretty much every year for the last 5 years. But again, we appropriate an amount and we offset salaries, but at the end of the year, if we have a strong year like FY21, there was lots of grant money. I believe it was a hybrid year. So our costs were way less. We didn't actually have to use any of what we appropriated. So we've been able to build up a fairly good balance in the choice account. So as of right now, there's about $3.1 million in our school choice account, what it's projected to be at the end of this school year.
Now, part of that, just to remind you, because it was the salaries that were applying to it, we had a lot of open positions, unfilled positions, because it was hard to fill positions in those years. And we're not really having that now. There's a lot more stability now in the staffing. And we don't have all the grants now too. So for both of those reasons,
Right.
I don't anticipate we'll be going back to zero. I anticipate we need to use more as the years go on. That's the downside of that.
Do you have a projection for 25? A dotted line box for this slide?
You mean, in other words, we appropriated $1 million. Right now, if I look at my expenditure report, it's about 880,000. So there's about 120,000 variable in those. Because those accounts, when you look at the year-to-date report, they'll show deficit in those
Right.
accounts.
Yeah.
I don't actually do the adjustment to transfer the expenses over till the year's done.
Correct.
So it's there, but when you look at some of the other accounts, we're still in relatively good shape. So I'm hoping that we can maybe keep that to like 500,000 or 600,000, which again adds and helps us as far as next year. I refer to this as the undesignated fund balance. I know everybody likes the term E&D, but what's really in this account is what matters. E&D is a state DOR thing, and they take things out that don't really lie. I guess is the way to put it. So as of FY25, when we started the year, we had $2.9 million in our undesignated fund balance. Now, E&D gets certified at 1.5. Why is that? Because they take out the $1 million you appropriated and they don't let you put that in E&D. It's still reserved for appropriation. We also have prior year expenditures of about $350,000. They take it out of their certification at E&D. It doesn't mean you don't have the money, because what they want me to do is when I close out 24, I do a reservation for those amounts. And then as soon as we go into FY25, I put it back in the undesignated fund balance and zero out those accounts. It's a bookkeeping thing that DOR really likes, which doesn't always make a lot of sense to me. But I've learned over the years that when they tell you to do something, you do it. That's how I get on the good side of the Department of Revenue. Right now, the current appropriation for FY 26 in our budget is $1 million, again, which I'm fairly comfortable with based on that. Because again, if we finish strong, you don't actually use $1 million, you may end up using less.
I've never seen a bar chart centered.
Centered? It was, it's not a bar chart, it's one of those.
Yeah.
Population growth. Those charts are.
But it's one of those pyramid stack type charts instead of a bar chart. That's why I did it. I thought it
Shows
was,
the bubble in the baby.
yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Remember when we talked about new ways to present the budget and stuff and new charts?
We try it
Right.
out, and then we
This is
go,
it.
do you like it or not? And then we, yeah.
Yeah, we can talk about this on Wednesday.
All right. As far as federal grants, so there are several other federal grants that are out there, but most of them are not going to be around anymore. These are the main ones that we get pretty much on an annual basis. The IDEA grants for entitlement for special education and early childhood, titles 1, 2, 3, and 4. This year we had a vacation acceleration grant. That one I don't think is coming back next year anyway, is it?
It is.
It's not, okay, but the other ones, titles 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the two special ed ones, we would like to see them come back because if you add them up, it's still $715,000 worth of revenue. And a lot of that stuff, especially the two special ed ones, you're gonna have to pay those services anyway, whether you have a grant to fund them or not. So that's the risk. I really don't think they're gonna reduce them, but it's really hard to tell because right now everything's all over the place.
I believe that we're 100% going to see reductions in the titled grants.
Yeah, it's the top two that are, I mean.
Yeah,
that's
if
the
that,
part.
now the Title I pays for people, right? So if that went away, if people who have been with us for a very long time, working directly with interventions with our students who need it the most, would be impacted. 2A is our mentoring and our PD. So what we having to reduce what we're providing our teachers. Title III is EL resources. Title IV, we'd have to absorb into our budget because that pays for, like, let's say, iReady or Panorama or something in our budget is what that. So, and then it would be pretty big if the IDEA was impacted at all, because that's all staffing for the top.
Yeah, that 240 grant is 95% paraprofessionals that work with our kids who need services. So that's what I mean. We would have to do that regardless.
So if you've got a gut feeling that 225 is gonna come out of this number, why don't we put it back in the previous slides as a budget? I mean, we've got where all the other puts and takes are, put it in 225, that's coming out. That's what your gut said right now.
Yeah.
But if we do that, then that just makes our shortfall that much bigger.
But truthful.
Yeah.
We do,
Right?
as
But
we
it's
go
also-
on in the messaging, you can see on the other slides, we kind of
We are
put
doing,
it in there. But
kind
we'll-
of
we'll
doing something
see.
similar to that. So.
Um,
No, but it's good to, what Eric is essentially saying is we're communicating with people who need to understand why that impact is taking place. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah, okay,
Okay.
I get it. All right, so strategies to balance the budget. So right now, as of sitting here today, our shortfall remains at $1.8 million. And that's a fairly substantial number. It's not something that I can say, well, I can move $20,000 here. Typically at this time of year, we're not even close to this kind of a shortfall. So we've got some options to close the gap, but we don't have a lot, assuming we want to try to maintain level services for this next fiscal year. Obviously, it's pretty much simple. You either got to increase revenue or decrease your expenses, one or the other, right? Our best source to do that, we've done, I think, a fairly good job over the last 10 years of building up our reserves at E&D and school choice, getting ahead on circuit breaker, all those things. Unfortunately, that's our rainy day fund and it's raining. So we now are going to have to tap into those to make this budget work. We could look at some of the revolving accounts and see if we can get some money out of there. We could do some grant stuff. almost a year ahead on that 240 grant, again, because of how the pandemic played out and the fact that we couldn't get people. So we could use all of next year's 240 grant and this year's that we're barely tapping into to help offset that deficit. So there are options there for that. We can add more school choice money. We're going to get to all of these, but basically these are our choices, at least that we see right now, to try and offset it as far as the revenue and decreasing expenses.
So if you look on the decreased expense side, we put a temporary hold, freeze in the budget right now. Take a look at if we can do a hiring freeze and if there's anything or not. I know we did this a year ago, right? These are some of the things we did a year ago. Healthcare plan, hopefully we can reduce that, defer the tech replacement for 1 more year. I don't recommend that, but it's something that we can look at. Defer hiring positions for a future year, reduce budgetary requests even further, pre-purchase items. We always try to do that to help out, or do not fill open or vacated positions. So always try to look at those first because we don't want to impact our current staff. To be more specific, if you go to the next slide.
Can I just make a quick comment on this? I know
Of
we've got
course.
Lindsay and I to tweet, but
Yeah,
there's a lot of things, and this slide's perfect, I get it. But there's a lot of things on this slide that you're doing regardless of the gap. Right? I mean, negotiate healthcare plan. Right? You're gonna do that regardless if we were.
We could have a
plus
surplus,
1.8 million
absolutely.
or minus 1.8 million. Right? You almost need a bold or the one, like which ones are really different here? And it comes down on decreased expenses, it comes down to 2 things. Stop purchases, reduce people. That's really, and you've got that in 5 or 6 bullets, but that's what it comes down to.
Honestly,
yeah.
a lot of the stuff.
I hear, I can see if I can break it. Sorry, Sean,
problem.
break this up a little bit, but there are some where we don't want to defer hiring a position, right? Or there's a number where always looking at everything. Can we go to the next slide though? Because it leads in.
Can I just say
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah.
I guess if I was doing it, maybe I would do 2 major bullets and,
Yeah.
and what you have are the sub bullets.
Okay.
So there's, stop buying, reduce people.
Stop spending.
Yeah, and then underneath it, it's hire freeze, don't backfill positions, right? Those are all sub bullets of what less people needs.
Unfortunately, I do think that the decreased expense side is not going to be anywhere near as impactful as trying to use one-time funds.
Yeah.
That's really unfortunately where
Because
we have to go.
it's so big.
Yeah, it'll be different too, like even the comment about seek new grant funding. I mean, from all the meetings we've sat to, I gotta believe you guys chase every single grant you possibly can. So I don't want anyone to take, not as 1 bullet on 50 slides, but I don't want someone to say, oh, they're gonna finally go look for grants because of the budget.
Yeah.
No, you're doing that anyway.
We
so
do it anyways.
I
But
almost
what we
miss
do
it.
though is try to see. So sometimes it's for supplemental, something in addition, but then what we try to do when we're in the situation is what fits into that grant that will actually pay for operational. So we look at a grant and go, oh, there's a literacy grant and we need to purchase ELA. Would this qualify for that? As opposed to getting, in a lot of cases, it's to bring in supplemental when that's what we need. Maybe it's not clear when you just look at it.
Yeah.
But that's what we do.
And we do that though, all
Yeah,
the time.
All the
I
time.
know.
I was looking at stuff that's really different.
Yeah. So this isn't everything, but for some ways and looking at numbers, if we reduce the 5 requested, and granted, we know there's more than 5 requested positions, right? Starting at the bottom and going up, but reduce the 5 requested positions to 3, how much we potentially save. We have 1 potential retirement. No one has officially put in yet, but typically if from someone, if they're at the end, the top of the scale and bringing someone in, it could be about 30,000. Different savings, which it all adds up. Hopefully the chapter 70 will go up from 75. Hopefully additional transportation, state aid would add that from the school choice reserves. If we added an additional 600,000. I don't love this. I don't love that. I'm just going to say that. But if we had to, that's where we would need to do it. any potential additional local aid, either from Upton if there's more, or if there's a way to get some from Mendon to help, offset some of the operational costs from 100,000 to 200,000 in that range would be really helpful. Remaining options under review. Obviously, we talked about the reduction in healthcare costs. We're hoping we can bring that down. That was kind of some late breaking bad news of the last week. I told Jay he needs to stop telling me how the budget gap is getting wider every day, and but no, it's not his fault. But the last week we've had a few areas where it's been breaking in the wrong direction. Evaluate not filling open positions. So when we look at if anyone's leaving or something like now, and say, okay, do we see if we can get by, or if we have to, so that's something we always look at. Do we increase the use of the 240 grant for an offset, a greater offset? And do we continue to look at how we might be able to reallocate positions to meet higher needs, which we've done a lot of in the last couple of years, where, we've had some declining enrollment at high school, and we've reduced at the high school a position, sometimes just to reduce costs. Sometimes it's been a reallocation of that position to another place in that memorial or another location in the district for the funds. So these are a few of the list right now.
Even, as far as strategies for closing the gap, like chapter 70 and transportation, that's nothing
Correct.
we can do.
No,
Sure, we can note that maybe there's dollars coming in, but
we know, chapter 70 typically will go up, so it's a conservative estimate, on those, but typically when we go through, we'll gain at least 100,000 from the state. Right, usually we anticipate.
We'll talk about, as I said, the other piece though is in 2 weeks, you're gonna certify your budget. It doesn't mean we have to certify it at that low number that Upton is thrown out. We can certify at a higher number and always reduce it if they can't fund it. You don't want to go the other direction and go up. So that may be part of the strategy, is we have to shoot for a little higher number, at least to start off with. And that's something we have a conversation with, with the town of Upton.
So it would be nice to have a timetable by the time we come to the March 10th meeting, timetable for when we need to start making decisions about how we're going to do this. And then also, there's a little bit of snow plowing going on here, right? You're actually just pushing that expense out in the future. It's going to hit you even harder the following year.
Well, if we tap,
That's my next slide.
if we tap into one-time funds, there's a purpose for building up reserves, right? Is so that when you have a problem, you have money to do something about it. This may be the time that we have to, but yes, you're kicking the can down the road in a year. So
Some implications for the next year, by going deeper into reserves, it may get us through this one last year, but then we're really, have reduced our reserves for the next year. If we use too much of that 240 grant, then we won't have that, carryover for the future. We are continuing to maintain these level services while making a few target investments, but every year we are minimally maintaining and not doing what we need to do has implications for what we're providing, over time. If we put off any tech investments further, at some point we need to handle that. And we have some strategies we're working on too. We haven't really talked about it, but with grants and trying to figure out what we can figure out. And I know they talked a little bit about it at their presentation, but I haven't put in the fiscal cliff slide yet that I've had in the past, that I will for the budget hearing. But we are we've been approaching and keeping an eye, on that. But next year is where it's at. We're at it now, but we have some reserves, like a little safety net of the year, but then next year we do not have it. And that makes me nervous for if we weren't unable to have an operation override, the catastrophic impact that would be. And so it's balance. I was talking to Jay earlier, just knowing that that's there next year, and what do you do this year in next year to make sure it's not as catastrophic if it didn't go through, and trying to plan out beyond this 1 year and our thinking and strategy. Because if we went all in on, you know, using all of these reserves and all of these option safety nets and have none, then, you know, we can't be in that situation next year. So whatever we can get to help us reduce it without going as deep into reserves, at least creates a little bit of a safety net next year. We still will need the operational override and supports based off of like the funding that towns, you know, don't have at the point that will be next year, right? But rather it being this big, it'll be this big, if it didn't go through, there would still be major cuts and loss of staff and all of that and programs, et cetera, but hopefully not as catastrophic. And the goal would be that we would be able to get the town support. You know, you have to kind of think about now and think about the short term and long term.
Can you explain to me the 240 grants and how is that like a pot of money that we've been given for a certain period of time, or is it renewed every year? How does it taking more from it now?
Well, so we got to a point where we're like a year ahead on that grant as well. So most of what we're getting this year, we're not using this year. What we're using this year is what we got last year. This is all again stems from back during the pandemic when we couldn't find people. So we ended up getting ahead. It's an entitlement grant. It's a determined allocation. You know, Mendon-Upton, you're going to get this amount of money. So we get it every year, but it has been going up and it's around $575,000. We are using some of the FY25 money this year, but not a lot, probably about $80,000. So that means there's still going to be $500,000 sitting there. The idea is you use that 500,000 next year and maybe tap in for another 100,000 out of it, and you have another 500 or 450 that you're carrying over. We could just use it all up next year, and then we go back to where we don't have the carryover. The federal grants used to be 1-year grants, but they changed about 6 years ago, and now they do like 3 years on the grants, so you can carry money over, and they don't really give you a hard time about it. So that's where that really comes from. The issue is that grant pays specifically for paraprofessionals. That's what we use it for. So eventually, if that money had to get funded in the budget, in the operational, then you're going to have to fund it. And the other negative piece, but I think we could work our way around it, and I've talked about it before, is there's a federal requirement called maintenance of effort that says if you spend X amount of dollars on special education this year, next year you have to spend at least that much or more. You can't spend less unless you have a good reason. A good reason is you had a reduction in out-of-district tuitions of 6 kids. That's a good reason. Just saying that, well, we, didn't get the grant money and we don't have local funding, they may not like that one as much, but I'm pretty sure we could work our way around it. Because I don't know what the penalty is for not meeting maintenance of effort, especially since it's a federal requirement, not a state requirement. Federal government doesn't seem to want to require anything right now.
Right.
So who knows where it's going to go, but that would be one way. That would be my first option, is if we have to, we use up that grant. We deal with whatever we have to deal with before we dip into other things. The school choice piece, again, if we could profit an extra 300,000 that we appropriated this year that we don't spend, that's half of the 600,000 we're talking about adding in. It's not as catastrophic then. So I'm less concerned about that. E&D is a different story because you don't want to get it to a point where you really just have nothing in your reserves as far as that goes. And my goal has always been to make sure we have reserve money in case something happens during the year and you have to pay for it. That's the purpose of
So
it.
like, what if,
You get an
what if-
out-of-district placement that costs $600,000. How do you pay for it?
or what if like some of these major systems we're trying to replace, let's say the capital doesn't go through and then building management system goes out or something, or paging goes out, right? And you can't have no paging in a building. There are things that we would have to replace, and then school choice is the best place to do those types of things if we needed to.
Ultimately, I prefer to have additional funds in the school choice account than in the undesignated fund balance, because that's less, it's harder to use that money than it is when it's in a revolving account.
So if there's an emergency, that's the best place
Right.
to go for the emergency.
So I'm assuming that this is what you're going to present on March tenth.
It'll probably change
Okay.
between now and
But,
March 10th.
you know, there's more to it, like I have kind of the front portion that I'll add, you know, more about schools and outcomes and all of that. And then at the end, kind of more the fiscal outlook, you know, for the future too. But yeah, a lot of this
We're gonna have
structure,
to certify something at the end of the meeting. So,
correct, yeah.
so herein lies the problem. This is gonna be presenting a dilemma where we've already certified, so then we gotta move on, and there probably is a timetable of events or situations that will happen, which clarify the situation for the towns after March
Right.
10th.
So
Is that clear, or is that, do we know what that is, or do we have a default way that we're gonna budget?
the ball right now is in Upton's court, in that they have to come and say to us, here's a number that we can afford as a net increase. Excuse me there. So they told me they're gonna do their best. They were waiting for somebody to come back who was away, which I think he was coming back this week. We should have an answer in a couple of weeks, but I would say for the open hearing, we pick a number that's probably larger than what they can afford, and that's where we certify to start. Because we can always change it. We can always come down.
And we've always been in this position where, I mean, it's really the assessments to the town is, it's the most important part of this, of the March 10th meeting. From that March point all the way to, you know, August, when after we get the rest of the state funding and we've worked out staffing and worked out positions and people have suddenly retired and all of that, that's where we get clarification on the rest of the budget. And it's constant from that March all the way through August. But it's the, you know, interactions with the towns and getting to the assessment amounts there.
Retirement doesn't get you much, it gets you 20 to 40K, because you're bringing in somebody at a lesser salary.
Per person.
Unless you don't fill the position. So last year, there were a couple we,
Hear
you
that?
know, did
I'm just
some.
gonna say my opinion real quick, and I hate that line so much. Because it's like, if we decided not to backfill that position, then maybe we should look at getting rid of that position so we can go hire a memorial first grade teacher. Or go hire, like, it's one of those things where it's like, we gotta look at all the positions that we have all the time. And say, which ones don't we need? But if it's like, you know, I'm to pick, oh, it doesn't matter, subject X, so I don't want to offend anybody. The subject X at Nipmuc retires, and then we don't backfill subject X. Well, should we have looked at getting rid of position X? You know what I mean?
Well, but you gotta remember,
yeah.
getting rid of it, you're getting rid of not X at the top. You're
I
getting
get
rid
it,
of
but you're
C
saying
at the
we
bottom.
had more teachers than you need.
No, but it's not.
Well,
It-
hold on,
it-
it is saying that, because if you had 5 teachers and you go to 4 because of a retirement, why couldn't you have been at 4 this year?
Well, the reason why we did it this year was because we had a bubble coming through in 8th grade and we didn't fill a couple of those. And then we reallocated one to cover like the bridge program that was doing small group. And then we did schedule changes. So part of it is about how do we communicate it in a way that it doesn't sound like we didn't need it, because we do need it. And if we don't need it, that's where we look to reduce and prioritize. Sometimes we need this programmatic person and position more than we need this, and then we kind of look at that. So it is ongoing. We have these conversations all the time about staffing, but when we've had a number some years when we've had a number of retirements, that's where we've kind of re-looked at how we could shuffle some schedules or do something differently, which is what we did the last couple of years and a couple.
I'll just wrap up my thoughts. I think you should look at the shuffle every year. And
We do though.
And kind of make retirements, because the optics of the way it comes out in a presentation
Okay.
don't sound good. It's like, oh, well, we didn't backfill because that person retired. It then makes you say, well, did you need it last year?
But we did.
Well, hang on.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, now I'm gonna go down the path with you. So science teachers at Nipmuc, you get 5 of them. If one retires and you decide to go to 4 for next year, we can make the argument, why didn't you have 4 science teachers this year? Like, and I disagree, trust me, I'm all about supporting the schools. I want to have the right number of people. I want to hire the people we're asking for. I just be careful with the optics of not backfilling a retirement, because I think it can come away with you saying, well, if that person didn't retire, would we have 5 science teachers, but because they retired, we're only at 4 science teachers. And then-
Okay, we're okay with having 4 because they retired.
Yeah,
But if
no.
they hadn't retired, we'd have 5.
Yeah, and I'm trying, I don't know how to explain some of it, like, so like they're at the high school, it's all student driven, the schedules. And so when like the student, as a high school thing, when the student schedules come out and you have a great need in certain areas, and that's where they look at, and that's where we're able to identify with the incoming classes, like what the needs are. And we don't get that information of, you know, you guys do the signups in like February,
Yeah.
March, right? So we don't get that until after, you know, budget.
But I've seen you guys make curriculum decisions that reduce staff in one area and added staff in
Correct.
another.
Yeah.
That happens all the time.
Right,
So.
And we're
I guess
talking
it's
about
just
it all the
It's
time,
just
yeah.
repositioning it as balancing the staff across all the needs of the students, rather than thinking about it, well, they retired, so we didn't hire. It's just a different way of thinking about it, which causes you to speak about it differently. That's all.
Right, because that person didn't retire, it's not that they would continue with 5 teachers.
Right.
They didn't need 5 teachers, maybe a different teacher would move to a different
And
grade.
maybe there actually was
So
a
they're always
plan.
reallocated.
Maybe there's a plan in place for the last 3 years that this person's retiring. Oh, maybe we should reconsider having that as a subject and reallocate resources over to a different area. That's something you're doing all the time.
Right.
So it's just positioning it to the public can seem a little bit like we're not really considering all of the implications of the staff that we have.
You said, wait,
It sounds more reactive. It sounds like you're being more reactive than actually proactive.
Right.
Thoughtful.
But I don't think there's a problem here because
Yeah.
I've seen you guys do this
Right.
before, but it's just how you position it to the public because they can be very sensitive to that.
But I think, so it's the 4th bullet on the previous slide, right, in the pot, or, what's the, sorry, it's not my deck, whatever, the one that says remaining variables, the 4th bullet, I guess it's 2 slides down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can just say annual reallocation process. Sounds better than retirements resignations.
Yeah.
well, okay. I'm hearing you and I don't want to sound defensive, like, so when we put that in, the variables are when we have resignations
So
and we bring
rebalancing
someone
the
in,
staff.
they're coming in at different salaries. So like we are constantly,
Yep.
the salaries are going up and down in these positions
Just
based
put in
off of,
rebalancing the staff instead
you
of
know,
who's
who's coming over.
Saying it differently.
Yeah.
Same.
That's all it is.
I'll also speak to out of district needs. Jen D'Angelo and I today went through our list and took out people that have moved out, put in a couple of people that are under evaluation. So I'm fairly comfortable, at least as of today, with what we have funded for out of district costs and what we have for revenue, not revenue to support it, but where it's set in the budget. But that's today. And in a month that could change because that's the one that is always a variable the entire school year. So, but these are the things, I mean, the big things here are really health insurance is the big one and maybe some additional state aid or something like that. I mean, those are the 2 variables. Other than that, we're looking at reserve funds and reductions of expenses as best we can. It's fine to, we could do a budget freeze on all purchases going forward, like for instructional needs and stuff, but there's not a lot of money left in those accounts. So that, I mean, you save a little bit, we can maybe use some of that to pre-buy some other stuff. Maybe we can find some other funds to buy some of the curriculum that we have in next year's budget in order to take those costs out. But that's all stuff we're gonna have to work out over the next,
Here's a question. Do we know, Elena's here, do we know where Mendon, can we project where Mendon will stand relative to the MLC next year? No, we have no idea.
No, not a clue. I always think that they're gonna be somewhat proportional. They've always been close, 400,000 in each town, maybe a little bit up or down. This is the first year I've had this big of a variable, like 630,000 and 120. That's a dramatic change.
So I'm just wondering if it affects their MLC next year, then I don't know what I'm talking about here, right?
Okay.
So I'm just saying if it affects the MLC next year, then wouldn't they want to take action against having that happen?
See what you're saying?
So put it in reserve or something.
Well, so that was something that we had a conversation about as well, is, forget about donation or doing anything else. Is there a way to take some of that money you would have given us, put it aside for the following year? But again, it's one-time money, so it doesn't put them in a great position in continuing years.
So
But it does-
relative to the MLC, it might.
you never know, right?
Right, like almost as you could prepay next year's taxes, like, well,
Yeah.
you could prepay next year's contributions because maybe it shifts the other way and.
Right, but you remember that's not a choice that we get to make. That's a choice. that the town gets to make.
But they said they might want to make that. choice,
Right, so there are some
but-
options there on the local level that could help in future years. But I have tried for years to figure out where these MLCs are gonna land. One year they said, well, here's a formula you could use and calculate it. It was still off. I don't even try anymore because whatever they say it comes out is, that's what it is. And if I did a calculation and I thought it was gonna be different and it isn't, too bad for me, right?
Well, they change that multiplier to whatever they want, to make fit the budget that they've got.
The
So
amount of money
it's
they
gonna
have.
be different every single year.
Right.
So,
But I mean, we're not in a great position right now. I mean, I do think we can function next year and do what we need to do, and I think we can get through it. But it does set the stage for FY 27, and that's what we have to keep looking forward to, is FY 27. 26 is a challenge, but 27 could be a much bigger challenge. And we knew that this was coming. This shouldn't be a surprise to anybody here. We kind of thought we were going to be here this year. We thought we were going to be here last year. If you remember, that it was always every 5 years you need an override. Well, this has now been 10 that we haven't done, and it's because we managed our money fairly well. But eventually it does catch up when you have, state aid going up by 1% and local aid going up by 1.75%. That's, this just doesn't work.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I think the COVID bump helped us a little bit,
Yeah,
but
we did well.
Yeah,
Pandemic.
but you
Maybe
guys-
everybody else did, but we did.
you guys did a nice job managing for that. It's getting late here, but I just got to say this comment, and it is, you almost get like there's this matrix, right? 2 by 2, maybe it's 2 by 3 by 3 or something like that. But there's income range, or there's going to be income ranges, right? And it's kind of a worst case, best case. And maybe you can even say it's somewhere in the middle, right? But is it like the state budget where it is right now, or is it the optimistic number of chapter 70 goes up to $100 per student, and busing goes up to 95, and then there's kind of like whatever, Jay, you've got it in the previous slides, but there's costs, right? And you think, okay, healthcare is going land somewhere in the middle, and then there's our asks, right? And the asks can go from anywhere from positive 3 headcount to minus 3 headcount, something like that. And then you end up with a gap, which is how much you're going to dip into reserves. And you could almost show a view that depending on where we land, the dip into reserves, and my rough big animal math says it's $600 to $1.3 million, right? That would be kind of the range.
Right.
And what we need to do, some of the stuff is uncontrollable, some of the stuff is partially controllable, but this is kind of where we're going to be, in that. And then I think ultimately we're going to be asked to certify a budget, and we have to pick a point in time as to where we want to be on that $600 to $1.3 million range.
It is the toughest part about having to certify a budget the second week in March.
Yeah.
That doesn't start till, 3 months later, and you don't even have a state budget till a month after that.
So why wouldn't we just certify, if you go back to your headcount stuff, right? You don't have to flip sides, but it's very reasonable, right? You get your 3 headcount in there of the 3 elementary school positions, you've got whatever, it's the sustained kind of level, right? And that's going to show the gap at 1.8 or whatever it is. And I know it puts Upton in, I guess, a little bit of a tough spot, but why wouldn't we just certify at the highest number right now? Like next week? Because ultimately you guys have to.
Well, it would
I would say
lead,
the same thing.
it would,
Other than optics and playing nice in the sandbox.
yeah, I mean, we've done that in the past,
Yeah.
I believe, and it does not, it's not playing in the sandbox when we know that they can't do that. So it will lead to either what happened in Mendon before, like straight up, it's going on an override and that decision's made and that's out of our control. Or we just force the hand where they have to start making reductions in all of their staff and services in Upton, which is what he said. So if we went too high beyond, so it's been helpful to like work together and collaboratively, not to blow that up, but.
Well, let me say it a little bit differently. So, again, I keep picturing this variable slide, but what you could say is depending on what Upton can do, will drive what Mendon does, and then ultimately drives the delta of how much we use in reserves. Right, because actually, that's a good way of saying it. You almost have a waterfall. Upton's decision drives Mendon's output that drives the delta in reserves. And so you could go certify the budget, saying, hey, we think we're going to use 1.3 million of reserves if Upton can only contribute what they've said so far. But it doesn't mean that in June we can't come back and say, hey, no way we're using 1.4 million of reserves. We're bringing that back down to 600, and here's the cuts that we're doing to get there. Like,
I think I'd approach it differently. I think I would first work with Upton to see where they're at. But when I met with them I met with Joe Layden last week, my conversation was basically, could you fund enough so that Mendon's not getting a decrease, but they're at zero?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the target we shoot for. That's going to be higher than what it was because the percentages changed enough that originally I thought we were like at about $100,000 reduction for Mendon, and now it's 172,000. But I have to do the math and then communicate that to him. I wouldn't want to just drop that on him because the optics of that blow up in our face. But I would say, look, this is what we're doing. We're doing this for a reason. We know you may not be able to fund this all, but for right now, we're going to hit this. But we've also for years have gotten this. Once you put a number out, why do you change it? If that's the number, that's the number. It's our problem then. It's not your problem anymore. And we really don't want to push to an operational override because they can't fund it or force the town to make adjustments there.
So let me say what I said maybe a little bit differently. If you can work with, if we can get an answer from Upton where we think we know where they're going to land, right? And maybe you go back to you said, you know, you're back into the Mendon zero. Now the only variable we're guessing on is how much of the reserve we want to dip into. And what you could say is that, okay, we're going to go on the high end, hoping that Chapter 70, transportation, all this other stuff comes in. And every time one of those increases, our reserve dip gets small. And then when we hit June, if we're not comfortable, then maybe we have to make some headcount cuts and we've got to do other things to protect the reserve. But I guess what it allows us to do is certify high with the assumption of lots of reserve use. Because
But you got to have it all settled out by May 1st when the towns have their votes, because they're going to vote their budget on May 1st and May 2nd. That's the number you're going to get.
This is exactly why I said it. And then there's also restrictions on when you can notify staff.
Right. And then when
all these things.
you have reductions in staff, then we have an early deadline on that in May, and then it
I get
all
what you're
the
saying.
bumping of
Yeah,
staff and certification.
But I guess the challenge, our runway is just so darn short, right? We're
Yeah.
13 days away from having this meeting. And I think at the end of the budget, we need to read that nasty, horrible one pager. Like, we can't come to the meeting with 9 different versions of that.
Oh, no.
But we're not meeting again as a school committee before that. So like,
Well, don't we have budget subcommittee Wednesday?
Yeah.
So I can put some scenarios together for Wednesday, so
Yeah.
you can see what various things look like. I can talk with the town of Upton and see, like, based on this, could you do this? Or what do you think the best is you can do? But the timing of this is not great. Usually by this point, we've done something to resolve our shortfall, but it just continued to grow this year. And again, we knew it was coming. I'm not surprised by any of this. It's just, a couple things surprised me this year. One was how the MLCs came out. One was how much the lane changes was. But that's the fun of managing public budget.
so I'll slow down here, but I'll make my last comment. I'm in favor, because you guys are putting this together. We're going to hit an operational override next year, regardless.
Yeah.
And I would rather see Memorial pick up the 3 teachers they need. I'd rather see us do the minimal iPad refresh that we need for the oldest units. And I'd rather see us go into the funds a little bit more than we're comfortable with. And if the override budgets fail next year, well, all those cuts are going to happen anyways. But we kind of got one more year out of it.
So that's a really good point. So what you're arguing there for is, let's try to snowplow less.
Yes,
Let's not snowplow the whole thing into next year.
because we could
I
meet,
agree with that.
Well, no, actually, I think he's saying the opposite.
Yeah.
He's basically saying, let's get through this year and let's not decimate ourselves this year. I mean, we have,
No.
Let me
he's
give you an
saying
example.
Allocate some expenses that you're putting off to next year. Allocate some expenses this year.
no, I don't understand it, but
This year.
let's use, fake numbers for a second. Let's say next year, because it fails, we have to lay off 20 people. We could do 15 next year and 5 this year, or we could do 20 next year. That's gonna be your choice. What I think Eric is saying is do the 20 next year, don't do 5 and 15.
Yes, but he's also saying for something that's a positive spend, right? So like the technology refresh.
Well, that's not a 1-year spend, that's a 4 or 5-year spend. So you're committing to that, which means you may have to actually do more layoffs to cover that cost.
Agreed.
So then you have to place value on, to me, you have to place value on staff before devices.
Okay.
but the unknown is kind of always gonna hang out there.
Yeah,
And I don't know, I think it's, I know it's death by paper cuts when we're going through this, right? It is, and it's, I think I would rather keep all our limbs for next year. And then, the year after, we're either gonna lose 2 arms or not. But why lose 1 arm next year and the 2 arms the year after? Let's just, go.
well, actually, if you've got 3 arms, you're gonna make some money.
There you go, yeah. But I think anyways, that's just one opinion, but I think that's kind of what you guys need, some opinions as you're putting together
Yeah.
the final answer.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And it's good to think about.
Right.
I'll give you that.
Good times.
Anybody else?
Oh, wait, go to the last slide. Go to the next slide. Okay. See, thank you for your support. I'm trying to end on a nice
Do you
note.
want to tell them about the pictures I want to put in that you took out or no? All right.
I'll
And on a positive note. look at
I'll
our
just take a
students.
motion to adjourn.
No, we still got.
That's subcommittee
Oh,
stuff.
yes.
All right, school committee subcommittees. Jim, anything on budget?
No, but we meet on Wednesday. We tabling the policy stuff till next time.
Nope,
No, we should.
let's
do
go,
this.
that's next up. Carrie, policy subcommittee?
It's okay.
Okay.
Thank goodness.
All right, so we have 2 policies that we brought forward last meeting that we are bringing forward for a second reading, and then we're looking for a motion and vote to approve. Those are KDCB and IJNDD.
I can approve, to, policies up for a second reading tonight.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then we also have 2 that we're bringing forward for first reading. Those are IJMDE, IJMDC. To you, from your notes. And then lastly, we have IJNDCR. So we are recommending that be removed because there is no corresponding MASC policy. And in addition, the policy that we just approved, KDCB, and one of the other policies that we brought forward for first reading, IJNDC, have incorporated there were a couple of notes that our attorney made that said we should retain those pieces, so they've been incorporated into the other policies. So given that there's nothing in there else that we need, and it was recommended that we remove it, and MASC does not have the policy, we're recommending that we vote to remove that.
Motion to remove policy IJNDC-R.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Nothing going on with negotiation subcommittee, superintendent evaluation subcommittee, Carrie.
It's me. We haven't met since the beginning of February and we're in review of her progress tonight.
And Matt, anything else on capital planning? I guess we had our big.
We had our multi-board meeting a couple weeks ago. So the committee meeting on Wednesday.
Okay, excellent. I don't think there's any other matters that weren't anticipated in the formal agenda that came up 48 hours ago. And so in the future, we're going to talk about budget presentation. More. And with that, we take a motion to adjourn.
Adjourn the meeting.